Morning. I'm Susan Johnson. I'm the membership secretary for the International Wizard of Oz Club. I'd like to read a story to you this morning in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Oziana. Oziana is the publication of the International Wizard of Oz Club that features original stories, poems, and artwork by our members. The story this morning is called The Harvest Ball, and it is by Gina Wickwar. It is from the 2013 issue of Oziana. Why, Jack, it's the very thing. We'll enchant the corn maze so none of the guests can escape, exclaimed the Scarecrow, beaming at his friend in admiration. I do believe the seeds in this new head of yours are quite the best in some time. Thank you, replied Jack, bowing modestly. The two friends were walking along the path that encircled the Scarecrow's corn maze, discussing the upcoming harvest ball to be held in honor of Ozma. The Scarecrow was hosting it the very next day, and just about anybody who was anybody at all in Oz or out was invited. But who can we get to enchant the maze? Asked the Scarecrow. The wizard's visiting the Red Gin and won't be here until just before the party starts. Jack clapped his wooden hands. Immediately, the sawhorse trotted out from behind a tall row of ripening stalks. Astride him was Scraps, the patchwork girl. She and Jack had come to assist the Scarecrow with preparations for the harvest ball. What's up? Asked the sawhorse as he slowed to a rocking gait beside them. Jack patted the sawhorse's head. You're often asked to bring Glenda to the Emerald City, so does that mean that you're good friends? Very good friends, agreed the animal. Then perhaps, said Jack, you could ask Glenda to perform a little magic for the harvest ball. He then explained the idea to scare the guests by enchanting the corn maze so no one could find a way out. As the sawhorse listened, his knotted eyes took on a gleam of appreciation. Like his old friend Jack, the creature enjoyed a good practical joke. So did Scraps. She leaped from the sawhorse's back and began walking on her hands and sang, such fun, such vociferous, good fun. It's just the thing of all, my dear. It's waiting to be done. The mere idea of scaring all those kings and foolish lords could have popped now only out from its side an orange gourd. While poor Jack patted his orange head nervously, she burst into giggles and somersaulted back into the sawhorse. Scraps, the Scarecrow scolded. The maze is meant to be fun, and besides, Glenda will be here to undo the enchantment. He turned to the sawhorse. You and Scraps go, asked Glenda. Right away, the sawhorse rasped. And with that, he gave a flick of his twig tail, told Scraps to hang on tight, and raced away, his golden hooves flashing in the afternoon sunlight. It was after midnight when the sawhorse and Scraps arrived at Glenda's palace. After being received by a servant who directed them to the throne room, they were soon greeted by Tosmia, one of Glenda's handmaidens. We wish to see Glenda, announced Scraps. That's not possible, Miss Scraps, said Tosmia, hiding a yawn. The wizard asked her to join him at the Red Gin. She won't be back until tomorrow afternoon. Then can we meet with Rosalind? Asked the sawhorse, for he believed the sorceress's apprentice might be able to help them. Tosmia shook her head. Unfortunately, Rosalind's gone with Glenda. But what is it you wish of them? Together, the sawhorse and Scraps explained the plan to enchant the Scarecrow's corn maze to provide the harvest ball revelers with a little Halloween scare. But it looks like we won't be able to do it, sighed Scraps. Everyone who could have helped is gone. Don't worry, said Tosmia. Glenda will be home for an hour or two before she leaves for the ball. I'll ask her as soon as she arrives. Then we'll leave it in your hands. Thank you very much, said the sawhorse, and thank Glenda as well. After saying goodbye, the sawhorse and the patchwork girl set out immediately for the Scarecrow's corncob maze. When they left, Tosmia sat for a long time in the throne room and thought very hard. Though she was just one of many handmaidens, she was an ambitious girl and longed to become an apprentice to Glenda, and here was her chance. With Glenda and Rosalind away, Tosmia would enter the sorceress's magic workroom, find the right spell, and have all the ingredients ready when her mistress returned. Glenda couldn't help but be impressed with her cleverness and ingenuity, and would certainly promote her, at the very least, to an assistant apprentice. Now fully awake, Tosma quickly made her way to Glenda's shelf-lined workroom and locked the door behind her. One by one, she pulled books of magic from the shelves and pored over them. Hours later, she found what it was she was seeking. She replaced the books, climbed a stepladder, and took down a vial of reddish liquid labeled losing one's way and disappearing. Next, she poured 2 ounces into a flat ruby dish, took a match from a box, and laid it beside the dish. Now, she whispered proudly, everything's ready. All Glenda has to do is cast the spell. The afternoon wore on, but the sorceress still had not returned. Beginning to worry, Tasmia sought out Glenda's head butler. Rubio, do you know when our mistress will be coming? She said she'd be here by 4. The butler, who had been arranging flowers in a large vase, turned to the girl. She's been delayed at the Red Gin's, miss, he said, and will therefore go straight to the scarecrows for tonight's ball. Tasmia was torn. If Glenda wasn't coming back before the ball, who would enchant the maze? Should she? No, definitely not, she thought, shaking her head. No, that would be wrong. Or would it? The scarecrow, Scraps, the Sawhorse, and Jack would believe the maze was enchanted. And when they found out it wasn't, it would be too late and everyone's fun would be ruined. The spell was all ready to go. All she had to do was say the words. She squirmed with indecision. When Scraps and the Sawhorse returned from Glenda's palace, they handed the Patchwork Girl a long list of items to be checked off. There were barely 2 hours left before guests would begin arriving for the harvest ball. As a result, Jack's head was wobbling precariously on its wooden stick, and the Scarecrow, usually calm and collected, was beside himself with worry. Punch bowl and cups check, shouted Scrap. Jellia brought him. Next, Jellia Jam. Ozma's maid had arrived from the Emerald City earlier that morning to help with party preparation. Button Bright had come with her, though no one could really know what he might do to help. Do we have enough knives and forks? Jack asked nervously. Of course, said Jellia, as she spread a linen cloth on a table. We have enough of everything. Besides, if we don't, Ozma, the wizard, or Glenda can produce whatever we need. What we need is to know whether Glenda has enchanted the maid. When did Tasmia say she'd be home? The Scarecrow asked the Sawhorse. Guests will be arriving very soon. But how will we know? Asked Jack. Glenda should be performing the enchantment as we speak. Ever practical, the Scarecrow said. Let's test it. Send someone into the maze now. But remember, whoever goes in will miss dinner and the speeches. In that case, I'll go, volunteered Button Bright, who liked eating but hated speeches. You're always getting lost, Button Bright, said the Scarecrow. You're not a good candidate. I am too, said the boy truculently. I always know where I am, but nobody else does. Ignoring him, the Scarecrow said, let's send Jellia. Me? The little maid glared at him. I'm here to make sure everything runs smoothly. Choose someone else to be your guinea pig. I'll go, said Scraps grandly, tossing her yarn hair. If I'm not out in an hour, you'll know it's enchanted. With that, she walked to the entrance of the corn maze, waved to her friends, and plunged in. Within seconds, Button Bright, who couldn't stand to be left out of any adventure, followed her. Frowning, the Scarecrow shook his head. Would you look at that? Start your stopwatch, Jack, and we'll see if they come out in an hour. An hour passed. Neither Scraps nor Button Bright appeared. Another hour passed. And nothing. By then, the harvest ball guests had begun arriving, so the Scarecrow, Sawhorse, and Jellia had to turn their attention to the newcomers. Jack, however, was beside himself with pleasure at how successfully Glenda's spell seemed to be working. The moment the sorceress arrived, Jack promised himself he'd congratulate her on her spectacular magic. And Glenda did arrive in her swan chariot. Alighting from the satin cushions, she kissed Ozma and Dorothy, who had arrived by magic belt moments before. A second later, the wizard appeared and bowed. The Scarecrow's lawn soon filled with none other than all the Oz royalty, nobility, and famous personalities, as well as many grand and noble guests from other nearby wonderlands. Jack was just about to thank Glenda when he spotted Button Bright circulating among the guests, snatching appetizers and other pre-dinner treats. Surprised and confused, he quickly took off after the boy. When he finally collared him, he demanded, "Where's Scraps?" "Don't know," the boy replied, his face smeared with cherry tart. "We were in the maze and then poof, she disappeared. I find my way out, but I guess she didn't. Now let me go so I can get some lemonade." The boy took off, leaving Jack baffled. He spent considerable time searching the Scarecrow's immense grounds, but found no sign of Scraps. He now had another reason to talk with Glinda. Her spell notwithstanding, Button Bright had escaped the maze, but Scraps hadn't. What was going on? Jack looked around, saw Glinda, and ambled over to her. He was just about to speak when Jellia showed a jug of lemonade in his hand and ordered him to pour the guests. As soon as he finished that job, he again sought Glinda, but now the Scarecrow intercepted him, telling him to make sure all the jack-o'-lanterns were lit before dusk. On and on it went. Jack never found a moment to talk with Glinda before everyone was called into dinner. And then the sorceress was seated at the head of the table next to Ozma, while he was seated at one farther away. After sitting through the wizard's lengthy introduction of Ozma, as well as a second one by Kumaparty, Jack glumly accepted the fact that he wouldn't get a chance to ask Glinda about Scraps until later. Well, perhaps it was no matter, he reasoned. He himself was going into the maze right after dinner, and if he ran into Scraps, he'd just ask her. As if on cue, as soon as dessert was finished, the guests jumped up and raced off to the entrance of the corn maze. With an on your mark, get set, go command from the Scarecrow, they plunged into the maze, singly, in pairs, and in groups, and began their harvest ball adventure. The sun had long set. The candles and the jack-o'-lanterns were sputtering. The ghosts and goblins' wails were starting to get on people's nerves, and still those who had not entered the maze waited patiently for their friends to reappear. Finally, the Scarecrow touched Glinda's sleeve. Your Grace, he said, I think it's time to let them out. Let who out? Glinda looked puzzled. The maze goers, he answered. It's probably time to lift the enchantment. What enchantment? The spell you cast to make it impossible to escape from the maze? She glanced at the entrance. From the maze? This maze? You must be mistaken. I did no such thing. And why should I? Because Tosmia promised Scraps and the Sawhorse you'd do it as soon as you got home. You know, make the maze scary and give all the guests a good thrill. He was suddenly nervous about where this conversation was going. Tosmia? Glinda chewed her lip a minute before demanding the Scarecrow call Scraps. But she's in the maze. Then call the Sawhorse. When the animal appeared, she asked him if Tosmia had promised to ask her to enchant the maze. Oh, indeed, nodded the Sawhorse, and I've wanted to thank you all evening. It's wonderful. We're able to frighten a whole crowd of maze goers in one fell swoop. Glinda was now deeply concerned. Ask the wizard to join us. The Sawhorse shook his head. He's also in the maze. At that, Glinda withdrew a ruby wand from her bosom and uttered a few quietly spoken words and produced Tosmia, her handmaiden. Tosmia knew instantly what had happened and stood quaking. Glinda looked at her sternly. Now, what spell did you use to enchant the maze? The losing one's way and disappearing spell, replied the girl meekly. Glinda sighed. I can undo it, but it won't be easy so far or fast. She began waving her arms, chanting softly. Soon, a few people began exiting the maze, appearing dazed and not a little frightened. What happened after Queen Zixie, rubbing her eyes? I was totally lost and couldn't see anybody else in the maze. Where did everyone go? The same question was on everyone's lips. During the next half hour, when all the remaining guests had struggled out, they continued to talk excitedly among themselves and to ask what had happened to them in the maze. Not only had they become hopelessly lost, but worse, they had all become invisible to each other, which had frightened them much, much more. After a few minutes, the Scarecrow stepped forward. The maze had been purposely enchanted so they couldn't escape, he told them, but he was at a loss to explain why they had become invisible. Jellia then took over and urged the partygoers to return to the Corncob Mansion and prepare for the ball. I think I know why Button Bright escaped from the maze, the wizard said to Glinda. They had moved into the ballroom as the orchestra was warming up. It's because he is always getting lost, and the losing one's way part of the spell didn't affect him. When Glinda nodded, he glanced at Tosmia. And just what will you do with this young lady? Glinda turned to the girl. Why did you do it, Tosmia? The girl looked down. I wanted to help you and then maybe you'd be impressed. You'd teach me some magic and I could learn to be an assistant apprentice. I didn't mean any harm. Well, no real harm was done. But had I known what you wanted, I would gladly have helped you. Then perhaps you'd know, never do something like this until you've been educated in the art of sorcery. Osmia nodded, then found a chair at the edge of the ballroom. Glenda eyed the wizard. Don't worry, she said in a low tone. I won't be too hard on her. She's clever, has great potential, and I will help her learn some innocent magic. With a trumpet fanfare and a drum roll, the corn silk curtains lifted, showcasing the Harvest Fall Orchestra. At the piano was the scarecrow with Kabumpo behind him, turning the pages with his trunk. Every once in a while, the elephant would slyly pull out stray wisps of straw and munch on them, while the oblivious scarecrow pounded the ivories. On drums was Percy the giant rat, outfitted in a sleek pair of dark glasses. Next to him was the lavender bear, enthusiastically clashing his cymbals. Huffin' Puffin blew the trumpet, and on trombone was Joe King. Shaggy Man played tight harmony on a soprano sax. Herbie the medicine man made the clarinet sing as Tick-Tock backed him on French horn. The Tin Woodman and Jelly Jam comprised the flute section, while Jenny Junk added the piccolo obbligato. Chick the Cherub hugged the glockenspiel and soloed at every opportunity. The soldier with the green whiskers was, as usual, strummed his lyre. And John Doe deftly hammered the timpani. Scrap clacked her castanets. Woot the Wanderer shook his tambourine, and the So Forth sisters, Anne and Sally, played violin. Tolly Diddle played viola, the Frogman bass, and General Ginger the cello. Handy Mandy strummed glissandos on her harp. The Flittermouse flew giddily about the stage, and from time to time it encountered the conductor's baton. This considerably irked the maestro, Professor H.M. Waddlebutt, T.E. As the dancers took the floor, the musicians struck up a waltz entitled Golden Waves of Corn, a favorite of the Scarecrow. Well, said Glenda, as she stood to dance with Prince Schools, this has certainly been a very interesting evening. By now, everyone knew about the enchanted maze and the role Cosmia had played. Indeed it has, said the prince, swinging the sorceress onto the ballroom floor. Dorothy and Button Bright waltzed past, while Polychrome and King Rinkitink moved gracefully across the floor. Betsy Bobbin and Ojo, Tandy and Trot, and Randy and Annette greeted their friends as they glided by one another. Prince Inga executed an elegant pirouette with Ozma, while Private Files and the Rose Princess swayed together off in a corner. May I? The wizard offered his hand to Cosmia. The girl blushed. Do you really wish to dance? She asked shyly. Linda is very angry with me. True, agreed the wizard, pulling her up from her chair. But Oz is a land of love, and I know Glenda forgives you. How do you know? She asked. I have it on the best authority, he chuckled, and then he led her out to the dance floor. Seeing this, Handy Mandy played a joyous arpeggio on her harp, and the assembled crowd burst into applause. Gliding by in the arms of Prince Schools, Glenda gave the wizard a smile of gratitude. The end. I hope that you have enjoyed this story and that you will join us for more stories from Oziana, the publication of the Wizard of Oz Club, celebrating 50 years.